and short intervention on the UN Treaty to Anton Pieper from SÜDWIND-Institut in Germany to give us an overview about the researches we did as Change Your Shoes about situations in other countries very shortly.
Sure. Thanks, Stefan. Thank you, Lola Sanchez-Caldente, and thank you, Annelies. Thank you, Heidi Hautala, for co-hosting this important roundtable. Thank you, Ruqeya Rafiki and Ahmed Kutubuddin for sharing this important insight and the situation in Bangladesh. My name is Anton Pieper. I work for a German-based NGO which is called SÜDWIND-Institut on global supply chains. And we as SÜDWIND-Institut, we have been coordinating the research for the past 2 years within the NGO coalition Change Your Shoes. So I would like to make 2 points, and I will try to be very brief. I have about 5 minutes, right? Okay. And the first point I would like to stress is that the roots that are underlying the problems we have just heard are certainly not to be found in Bangladesh. I will develop on that a little bit. Shoe production is a growing global industry. The scale of the shoe industry is immense. In 2016 alone, there were 23 billion pairs of shoes produced worldwide. And that equals, if you want to make that calculation, 3 pairs per shoe per person worldwide. And there is no end in sight. The industry is constantly growing. There is increasing demand from consumers in Europe, but also in the US, but also in production countries such as India and China, for example. Now, 87% of this worldwide production is being produced in Asia. Now, the problems we are talking about are extremely low wages and poor safety standards. We are talking about people who work in some of the most toxic workplaces in the world. And we are talking about women who hand-stitch leather shoes without any form of job security and very few rights. Now, what we have been doing in the last 3 years within the campaign Change Your Shoes, we have gathered evidence in other countries in Asia, such as China, India, and Indonesia. And this evidence proves that shoe and leather production in all major production countries is directly linked to manifold workers' rights and human rights violations, such as the just mentioned. In China, for example, we found, among others, a systematic denial of basic trade human rights, such as the right of assembly, the freedom of association, as well as the right to strike. And those who are fighting for the rights are being brutalized and imprisoned. In Indonesia, we found, among others, extremely low wages, long working hours, no job and no social security, especially for those way down the supply chain, home workers, most of whom are being women. And these women are extremely vulnerable to exploitation by their employers. In India, we found, among others, extremely toxic workplaces and very poor safety standards, both in shoe factories and in tanneries that we observed, where toxic dyes and chemicals used for the leather tanning lead to various work-related injuries and health problems. So you see, we found many problems directly linked to shoe and leather supply chains in the major production countries in Asia. But then, we also did research in other parts of the world, in other production countries. And it became obvious that the problem we are facing in the global supply chains, how diverse, manifold, differing from region to region they may be, they are not limited to so-called low-wage or low-income countries, where supposedly we have low standards of national legislation and even lower standards of implementation of the latter. Most strikingly, we found a very similar set of violations of basic workers' rights in European countries, such as Poland, Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, and Italy, only to name a few. The recently published report Europe's Sweatshops illustrates that in all countries in Eastern and Southeastern Europe that have been investigated, the garment and shoe sector is by far the one where workers earn least. where the gender gap is biggest. In Slovakia, for example, women working in the sector earn 50% less than their male colleagues, and where basic workers' rights and existing national legislation are least implemented. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude on this first point, it is fair to say that workers and human rights violations are endemic to global garment and shoe supply chains, regardless of the region in the world, regardless of the production country. And that leads me to the second point I want to make, and I will be very brief here. The second point I would like to emphasize is the question of responsibility. Why are we discussing this today? Why did we bring this to the European Parliament? Because we see a clear responsibility of the EU, not only but also because of European consumption patterns. Now, who is the EU? Of course, the EU is all of us. It is the consumers, it is the citizens, it is civil society, trade unions, political decision makers. But the biggest responsibility lies with the European brands on the global market, some of them amongst the biggest players worldwide. And the overwhelming majority of those brands won't move. Of course, you will find brands, especially in the garment sector, that do move. In the shoe sector, less brands, and those that move way too slow. So we need EU institutions to stick to their letters of intent, if I may call it like that. What I mean is what is mentioned in the invitation also to this roundtable, like the resolution on the flagship initiative by the European Parliament, the staff working paper of the European Commission, and the conclusions on sustainable garment value chains by the Council. What we need is binding regulations for European brands and transparency in global supply chains. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anton.